Hey there, welcome back to Botanic Haven, the channel where we talk about everything green, from growing your own food to creating beautiful little plant corners right in your home or backyard. Whether you're a seasoned gardener with a full outdoor setup or just someone who keeps a few pots on the windowsill, this place is for you. We love sharing real, practical tips that actually work in everyday life. And today's topic is one that honestly changed the way I think about grocery shopping forever. So here's the thing, most of us buy green onions at the store, use them once in a recipe, and then toss the leftover roots in the trash without thinking twice. Maybe you've done it 100 times. I know I did. But one afternoon I was watching my neighbour Rose pot up some sad-looking store-bought green onions into a little glass of water on her kitchen windowsill, and I thought, okay, that's a bit quirky. A week later, she handed me a handful of fresh, bright green shoots she'd snipped right from that same bunch, and I was genuinely surprised. Not just a little surprised, like, wait, this actually works, surprised. That was the moment I started paying attention. What Rose showed me that afternoon wasn't some complicated gardening technique. It was just the idea that those little white root ends at the bottom of your grocery store green onions are very much alive, and they want to grow. They don't need much. They don't need a fancy setup or special soil or a greenhouse. They just need a bit of water, a little light, and honestly, your willingness to not throw them away. That's it. And once you try it yourself, you'll never look at a bunch of green onions the same way again. The beauty of this trick is that it works with almost any green onions you find at the store. Doesn't matter which brand, doesn't matter if they're organic or not. Doesn't matter if they've been sitting in your fridge for a few days, as long as those root ends are still somewhat intact, meaning they haven't been trimmed completely flat, you've got something to work with. I've even regrown green onions that look pretty rough coming out of a produce bag, and they bounce back just fine. Plants are resilient like that. They want to live, and they'll find a way if you give them even half a chance. Here's how to start. Take your bunch of store-bought green onions and cut off the green tops like you normally would for cooking. Leave about an inch or two of the white bulb part at the bottom, the part with the roots. Those roots are your magic ticket. Now place those root ends in a clean glass or jar and add just enough water to cover the roots without submerging the whole white part. You want the roots wet, but you don't want the bulbs sitting in water up to their necks, because that leads to rot. A shallow amount, maybe half an inch to an inch of water, is just right. Set the glass on a sunny windowsill, and within a day or two, you'll already start to see tiny green shoots poking up. It's honestly one of the most satisfying things to watch. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments. And if not, write 0. This way, I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. Now, the water method is great for getting started and it's super beginner friendly, but there's a next level to this whole thing that most people skip, and that's transitioning your regrowing onions from water into soil. See, when you grow green onions in just water indefinitely, they do regrow, but after a few cycles, the shoots get thinner and the flavor becomes a bit weaker. The plant is essentially running on borrowed time, using the energy stored in the bulb without getting much back. Soil changes that completely. Once you move your little onion starts into a pot with actual soil, they tap into nutrients, they anchor themselves, and they grow stronger each time you harvest. You don't need a big pot for this. A small container, even a recycled yogurt tub or a coffee can with some holes poked in the bottom, works perfectly. Fill it with regular potting mix, make a little hole with your finger, and nestle the rooted white end in there so it's snug but not buried too deep. Water it gently and set it somewhere with good light. A south-facing window is ideal indoors, but east or west-facing windows work too. Outdoors, a spot that gets at least 5 or 6 hours of sun is great. Within a week, you'll have noticeably stronger growth, and within 2 weeks, you'll be snipping fresh green onions regularly. One thing I've learned from trial and error, and from talking to other home growers, is that the snipping technique matters more than you'd think. A lot of people make the mistake of pulling the whole plant out when they want to harvest. Don't do that. Instead, use clean scissors or a sharp knife and cut the green shoots down to about an inch above the soil level. Leave that little stub there. That's where new growth comes from. Cut it too low and you slow the plant down considerably, but leave that inch of green stub. And within a few days, new shoots are already pushing up. My friend Lucas, who grows green onions in a long window box on his apartment balcony, calls this the shave and regrow method, and he's been using the same original plants for over 8 months now. 8 months from one grocery store bunch. That's the kind of math that makes you smile. Let's talk about light for a minute, because this is where a lot of indoor growers run into trouble. Green onions are pretty forgiving, but they do need real light. Not the dim corner of your kitchen, not the shadowy spot behind the couch, actual direct or bright indirect sunlight for several hours a day. If your windows don't get great light, you can use a simple grow light on a timer. Even a basic LED grow bulb in a regular lamp pointed at your plants for 12 to 14 hours a day does the trick. I've grown green onions under a grow light on a bookshelf in a room with no windows, and they did just fine. The plants don't care about the source, they just want the photons. Water is the other big factor, and honestly, it's where most people either overdo it or forget entirely. Green onions in soil want to be consistently moist, not soggy, not bone dry. A good rule of thumb is to stick your finger about an inch into the soil. If it feels dry at that depth, it's time to water. If it still feels damp, wait another day. In warm, dry indoor environments, you might end up watering every 2 or 3 days. In cooler or more humid conditions, every 4 or 5 days might be enough. The key is to pay attention and adjust. Overwatering is actually the most common way people accidentally kill their green onions. The roots sit in waterlogged soil. They start to rot, and suddenly your thriving little pot of greens turns to mush. Good drainage in your container prevents this almost entirely, so always make sure your pot has holes at the bottom. Now I want to share a story about a woman named Daisy who lives in a small apartment in a city, no backyard, barely a balcony, who figured out a system that I think is absolutely brilliant. She keeps 3 small pots of green onions going on her kitchen windowsill on a rotation. Pot 1 is freshly planted, pot 2 is about a week or 2 into growth, and pot 3 is at peak harvest stage. Every time she snips from pot 3, she starts a new pot from fresh store-bought onions. This way she always has green onions ready to go no matter what. She never runs out, she never needs to buy more unless she's starting a new rotation, and her kitchen always has that fresh, slightly earthy green smell that she says makes the whole space feel alive. It's a small thing, but it genuinely makes her happy, and I think that's kind of the whole point of growing things at home. Green onions grown this way taste noticeably better than store-bought ones, and I say this having done blind taste tests with friends, which sounds ridiculous, I know, but go with me. When you snip fresh green onions right before cooking and use them immediately, you get this bright, sharp, slightly sweet flavour that just doesn't survive the trip from farm to store to fridge to your plate. The volatile compounds that give green onions their distinctive taste start breaking down almost immediately after harvest. Growing your own means 0 time between harvest and plate, and your food just tastes better as a result. It's one of those things you can't really explain until you experience it. Another angle that doesn't get talked about enough is the visual appeal of these little plants. A few small pots of lush, bright green onion shoots on a windowsill look genuinely lovely. They bring colour and life into a kitchen or living space in a way that even decorative houseplants sometimes don't, because these are real, useful, growing things. My friend Ivy, who is, appropriately enough, obsessed with green plants of all kinds, started decorating her kitchen windowsill with a mix of herb pots and green onion containers, and her whole kitchen looks like something out of a magazine. She said it started as a practical thing and turned into something she's genuinely proud of. That tracks with how a lot of gardening stories go. If you want to take things a step further, you can actually grow green onions from seed outdoors in a garden bed or in larger containers on a patio or balcony. This is a bigger commitment than just regrowing store-bought bunches, but it gives you even more control over the variety you're growing, the spacing, and the yield. Bunching onion seeds are widely available and pretty easy to start. You can direct sow them in spring or fall in most climates, or start them indoors under lights about 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost date. They germinate within a week or 2 and grow quickly into robust plants that you can harvest repeatedly over a full season. For outdoor growing, the soil preparation matters a bit more than it does for a little indoor pot. Green onions like well-draining, loosely textured soil with decent organic matter. If you're working with clay-heavy or very compacted ground, mixing in some compost or aged manure before planting makes a real difference. Raised beds and large containers are actually ideal for green onions because you control the soil quality entirely. Drainage is excellent and you can position them wherever the light is best. A friend of mine named Oliver turned a neglected corner of his backyard into a dedicated green onion patch using just a simple raised bed and some compost from his kitchen's scraps. By midsummer, he had more green onions than he knew what to do with, and he started giving them away to neighbours, who then asked him how to regrow their own. And the whole thing kind of snowballed from there. There's something genuinely powerful about that kind of ripple effect. One person figures out a simple trick, shares it with someone else, and suddenly a whole neighbourhood is growing food on windowsills and in little backyard patches. Green onions are a perfect starter plant for this reason. They're forgiving, they grow fast, they give you visible results quickly, and they're actually useful in everyday cooking. If you've never grown anything before and you're looking for a place to start, this is genuinely one of the best entry points. You will see progress within days, not weeks. That early success builds confidence, and confidence makes you want to try growing more things. Let's talk about troubleshooting for a bit, because even with something as simple as green onions, things don't always go perfectly. One of the most common issues is yellowing leaves. If your green onion shoots are turning yellow instead of staying a rich, vivid green, the most likely culprit is insufficient light. Move the plant to a sunnier spot or add a grow light, and you'll usually see improvement within a week. Another cause of yellowing can be overwatering or poor drainage. If the roots are sitting in soggy soil, they can't absorb nutrients properly, and the leaves reflect that stress by turning yellow. Check your drainage and let the soil dry out a bit before watering again. Slimy or mushy white parts at the base of the plant usually mean rot, which is typically caused by too much moisture. If you catch it early, you can sometimes save the plant by removing the affected bulbs, letting the soil dry out, and cutting back on watering going forward. But if the rot has progressed significantly, it's usually better to start fresh with a new batch. This sounds frustrating, but honestly, because you're starting from grocery store green onions, starting over costs you almost nothing. You just buy a new bunch next time you're at the store and start the process again. Pests are rare with indoor green onions, but not impossible. Fungus gnats are the most common indoor plant pest, and they're attracted to moist soil. The adults are more annoying than harmful, but the larvae can damage roots. Letting the top layer of soil dry out between waterings discourages them significantly, and yellow sticky traps catch the adults. Outdoors, aphids and thrips occasionally bother green onions, but these plants are generally not high on the pest priority list compared to other edibles. A strong spray of water from the hose is usually enough to knock aphids off and send them on their way. Fertilizing is something you can do to boost performance, though it's not strictly necessary, especially if you're using fresh, nutrient-rich potting mix. If your plants have been in the same soil for a couple of months and you're noticing slower growth or paler color, a diluted liquid fertilizer every few weeks can perk things right back up. Something balanced, like a general-purpose liquid fertilizer at half the recommended strength, works well. You don't need to go overboard. Green onions aren't heavy feeders, and too much fertilizer, especially nitrogen-heavy formulas, can sometimes cause overly lush, tender growth that's more prone to pest problems and disease. A little goes a long way. One thing I find fascinating about regrowing green onions is how this simple practice connects to something much bigger, the idea of reducing food waste and becoming more intentional about the resources we use. Every time you regrow instead of toss, you're getting more value out of something you already paid for. Over the course of a year, even someone who only occasionally uses green onions in cooking can save a surprising amount of money just by regrowing them, instead of buying new bunches every time. And beyond the money side, there's the satisfaction of knowing you made something out of what would have been waste. That mindset, looking at scraps and seeing potential, is really the foundation of smart, sustainable gardening. Here's something else worth exploring, and it's a question I get asked a lot. Can you regrow green onions more than once from the same bulb? The honest answer is yes, many times over if you treat them right. Each time you snip the greens and leave that inch of stub, the plant pushes out new growth. In soil, a single bulb can go through 5, 6, even 10 or more harvest cycles before it starts losing real vigor. The key is giving it good conditions between harvests, enough light, consistent moisture, and occasional feeding. Over time, the original bulb may start to shrink and soften, and that's your signal that it's nearing the end of its productive life. At that point, you can compost it and start fresh, or you might notice that it's actually sent out small offsets, little baby bulbs forming around the base of the original. Those can be separated and replanted on their own, essentially giving you new plants from old ones without buying anything at all. It's like the plant is paying you back for taking care of it. Speaking of paying back, let's talk about the culinary side of things, because that's ultimately why most of us are growing these in the first place. Green onions are one of the most versatile ingredients in the kitchen, and having a constant fresh supply changes how you cook in ways that are hard to fully appreciate until you experience it. You start adding them to things you never would have before. Scrambled eggs in the morning, a quick bowl of ramen for lunch, a sprinkle over roasted vegetables at dinner. They work raw, they work cooked, they work as a garnish, they work as a main flavor component. The mild, fresh bite they bring to food is something that dried or frozen versions just can't replicate. Lucas, the friend I mentioned earlier with the balcony window box, told me that growing his own green onions genuinely made him a better cook, not because of any technical skill improvement, but because having them always available made him more adventurous in the kitchen. He started experimenting with Asian-inspired dishes that he'd always been intimidated to try because they called for fresh green onions, and he never seemed to have them on hand. Once they were just right there on his balcony, always ready, the barrier disappeared. He made his first proper cold sesame noodle dish, his first proper Korean pancake with green onions folded into the batter, his first proper Vietnamese-style dipping sauce. All because a grocery store root end sitting in some water on his windowsill said, "Why not?" Now let me tell you about something that surprised me when I really got deep into this whole regrowing journey, the difference between varieties. When most Americans think of green onions, they picture the standard thin-stalked bunching onions you find rubber-banded together in the produce section. And those are great, they're easy to work with, and they regrow reliably. But there's a whole world of green onion varieties beyond that, and once you start growing from seed or shopping at specialty markets, you start discovering options that have slightly different flavors, different textures, different sizes. Some are more pungent, some are milder, some have a slightly garlicky undertone. Exploring different varieties is one of those rabbit holes that sounds nerdy but ends up being genuinely fun, especially once you're comfortable with the basics. Rose, who got me started on all of this in the first place, eventually branched out into growing Welsh onions, which are a perennial variety that comes back year after year from the same roots. She planted a small clump in a corner of her garden 3 years ago, and it has literally never stopped producing. Every time she cuts the tops back, they regrow. Every spring, the clump gets a little bigger. She does almost nothing to maintain it, just occasional watering during dry spells and a bit of compost worked around the base in early spring. Welsh onions are hardy in most parts of the US, and they're genuinely one of the most low-maintenance edibles you can grow. If you have any outdoor space at all and you enjoy green onions, they're worth tracking down. Another variety worth mentioning is the Egyptian walking onion, which has a reputation that sounds too interesting to be real. These plants produce small bulblets at the tips of their stalks instead of flowers, and when those bulblets get heavy enough, the stalk bends over and the bulblets touch the ground and start new plants. Hence the walking name. Over time, a single plant slowly migrates across a garden bed, planting itself as it goes. It sounds like a science fiction plant, but it's completely real, and it's been grown in American kitchen gardens for centuries. They taste similar to regular green onions, and the young shoots can be used exactly the same way. Ivy planted 2 Egyptian walking onions in her raised bed last spring, almost as a novelty, and she said watching them slowly move across the bed over the summer was genuinely one of the most entertaining things she's witnessed in gardening. The whole family would check on them every few days to see how far they'd travelled. There's also the element of growing green onions with kids, which is something I think doesn't get highlighted enough. If you have children in your life, whether your own, nieces and nephews, neighbourhood kids, whoever, the water glass regrowing method is one of the most perfect beginner gardening projects imaginable. The results are fast enough to hold a child's attention. Within 2 days, something visible is happening. Within a week, there are real green shoots to be proud of. It connects kids to where food actually comes from in a way that's tangible and immediate, and it teaches a simple but valuable lesson. Things grow when you take care of them. That's a lesson that goes beyond gardening and starting it with something as simple and inexpensive as a grocery store. Green onion feels just right. I've heard from viewers who've done this project with their kids and described it as a turning point in how their children related to vegetables. Kids who previously refused to eat anything green suddenly wanted to taste the onions they'd grown themselves. There's psychology behind this. Children are more willing to eat foods they've had a hand in producing, but beyond the science, it just makes sense. You grow it. You're invested in it. You want to see what it tastes like. That's as human as it gets. One last thing I want to mention before we wrap up, and it's something I think about every time I walk past my little windowsill setup: the meditative quality of tending to plants. There's something quietly grounding about checking on your green onions in the morning, giving them a little water, snipping a handful for your breakfast eggs, and seeing new growth pushing up where you cut just a few days ago. It's a small act of care in a day full of obligations and noise, and it consistently makes me feel better. A lot of gardeners talk about this, the way plants slow you down, bring you into the present moment, give you something to attend to that responds to your attention with visible, tangible growth. Green onions do this in a small but very real way, and for people who don't have time or space for a big garden, they offer that quiet pleasure in a package that fits on a kitchen windowsill. A lot of the most passionate home gardeners I know started not with grand plans for elaborate kitchen gardens, but with small, simple experiments exactly like this one. Oliver started with green onions and now grows tomatoes, peppers, herbs and cucumbers every summer. Rose, who first showed me that glass of regrowing onions on her windowsill, has since built a full indoor growing setup with herbs, lettuce and even a couple of small citrus trees under grow lights. Daisy keeps expanding her windowsill rotation to include basil, mint and a little pot of chives. It starts small, it starts simple, and it grows into something you genuinely love. That's the Botanic Haven story too. Start somewhere, grow from there, and enjoy every step of the process. So, if you've got a bunch of green onions in your fridge right now, I genuinely encourage you to try this the next time you use some in cooking. Don't throw away those root ends. Put them in a glass of water, set them on your sunniest windowsill, and just watch what happens over the next few days. You'll be surprised. And once you see those first little green shoots pushing up, you'll understand exactly what Rose meant when she handed me that fresh handful from her windowsill and smiled like it was no big deal. Because to her, it wasn't. It was just what you do. It's just how it works. And now that you know, it can be that way for you too. Thanks so much for spending time with us here at Botanic Haven. If you found this useful and want to see more practical growing tips, tutorials and plant stories, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. We've got a lot more green goodness coming your way, and we genuinely love hearing from this community. Share your own green onion regrowing results. In the comments, photos, stories, questions, we read everything and we love knowing what's growing in your corner of the world.